Hello. In this video, I want to quickly walk you through the HASS core program or your HASS requirements using this worksheet that we have created in the School of Engineering and, of course, had reviewed by the School of HASS's Hub. In the School of Engineering, it's important to know that you have 20 credit hours or 5 courses that you need to complete with HASS. And within those 5 courses, you have some requirements to complete. So some of these are going to sound very familiar to you at this point, but I did want to go over them anyway. So first of all, you will have access to this worksheet. You can always ask your Hub advisor for a copy of it if you misplace it. We strongly suggest saving it in your academic advising folder on your desktop because it does have a lot of useful information. So on this worksheet, you can see what are HASS courses. These are all the class codes that are considered HASS courses, and you can see right here that management is not considered a HASS class. And then, of course, going straight into the requirements. So because the 20 credits typically breaks down to 5 courses, we can see them here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and below we can see the requirements that have to fit in there. So there's, of course, your first one, your first year requirement, which is the HASS inquiry class. So those are typically IHSS courses or the interdisciplinary HASS courses. But they could also be STSS, STH8, 1110, which is Science, Tech, and Society, and GSAS 1600. Your next requirement, of course, is going to be your pathway. So the pathway is going to be a series of 3 classes based on the HASS pathway that you choose, which may be connected to this HASS inquiry course or not, depending upon what your interests are. Your next requirement is your communication intensive. This is something you need to complete within your first 3 semesters at RPI, so by the end of the first semester of your sophomore year. In Ihss, you can see if a course is communication intensive or not, and I'll show you exactly where you can see that in a moment. And then your final requirement is you have to take a 4,000 level HASS course. This very typically is just going to happen in one of your later classes in the pathway, so it's not necessarily something you need to think about too hard. However, you do want to make sure that it does happen. Because it's one of your requirements. And the final note, be sure you read through all of these important notes here. They tell you things like you can only apply 3 courses to your HASS core that are 1,000 levels. So if you are bringing in credits, that's something to pay close attention to. It talks about the pass no credit policy. It talks about, again, your HASS requirements and an upcoming requirement with your professional development too, and it being a HASS course. So where I would like to start is I want to fill out this form with a couple different examples that are very likely going to help each of you decide what you need to do for next semester. By doing this, I'm going to start by taking us to the class search in Ihss, and we're going to be looking at these interdisciplinary HASS classes. So the first one that I'm going to choose is this one here, which is IHSS 1080 right at the top, History of Jazz and Improv Music. I mentioned before that I'll show you if something's communication intensive. You can see that right here. So this fall 2020, you can see that the History of Jazz and Improv Music is a communication intensive course. You can also see that it does fulfill the HASS inquiry requirement. So how does that work on the worksheet? So first of all, we have to put it on here. So let me quickly get my pen to type in IHSS 1080. So that is the first HASS course that we are including in our 5 class requirement. As we saw, it is a HASS inquiry course, so we can put that class there, and it is communication intensive, so we can put that course there. So we can see very easily that we have completed 2 of our requirements on this list with 1 class, which is really useful. It could theoretically also fulfill the first class in your pathway if you choose to choose a pathway that includes this course, which means you only will have 2 courses remaining in your pathway. Of course, it doesn't even touch the 4,000 level. So where would you go from here when you're planning your next semester? Well, we want to keep in mind that this course is going to sit here, this course is going to sit here. Again, very likely that 4,000 level is going to be one of these 2 classes, but if not, maybe it sits right here. And then you have 1 remaining course. Because you've completed your Haas Inquiry and your Communication Intensive course, I think the next thing that any student should be looking at is their pathway to see, is this the first course in your pathway, or do you want to explore? You can see just by this worksheet that you actually have the freedom to explore, because you have this one sitting out here, and very likely you also have this one too. What this also means is that you could potentially even declare a minor based on your pathway, because a minor is 16 credits, which means you'll have the 1, 2, 3 of your pathway, 4 of a minor. So that is one way to fill out this form, if you have completed both your Haas Inquiry and your Communication Intensive requirement. All right, so let's talk about another example. The next example that I'm going to use will be this class down here, IHSS 1150. And the reason I've chosen this one is because it's the first one on the list that is not communication intensive. However, of course, because it's an IHSS class, it does give you that Haas Inquiry requirement taken care of. So again, we would put that class right here. We know it completes our Haas inquiry, so we will put that right here. And because it is not giving us a communication intensive requirement, and because that is something we need to complete in our first 3 semesters, it's very easy to say that the very next requirement you should pay attention to is this communication intensive course. And that would be, I would say that would be or should be your priority for next semester. Of course, it's always good to keep in mind your pathway as well, especially because you will be moving through the pathway by taking this communication intensive course if this course is not part of your pathway, right? Because if it is not, we have our communication intensive course coming up. This course would sit here, this course would sit here, and this course would sit here. So you can see there's still a lot of movement, there's still a lot of freedom, but there are multiple ways to kind of get through your Haas requirements. So this communication intensive course may also be the first class in your pathway, so that gives you a little bit more freedom again, room for a minor if you wanted a minor, or if you just wanted to play around with some other Haas courses. And then, of course, there's the one that we always talk about, which is this IHSS 1150 might sit here based on your pathway. And again, that goes there, that goes there, and that goes there. So basically what I'm trying to show you is there's 1.5 million ways to fill out your Haas requirements. It's just understanding what those requirements are. And I want to do one more example. So again, with this example where we've only completed our Haas inquiry requirement, your number 1 priority should be communication intensive, and keeping in mind your pathway and what direction you want to take with that. So for our final example, I'm going to look at Gen Psych, Introduction to Psychological Science. And the reason I'm looking at that course is if you look over at Attributes, it is not communication intensive, and you did not get your Haas Inquiry course completed by taking that class, as much as it is a great starter class into Haas. So what do you do if you took Intro to Psych? Well, again, we put that in our first slot here. Psych 1200. Again, not a Haas Inquiry course, not a communication intensive course. It may very well be the pathway you want to choose, right? So that does give you a little bit of a crossover. However, if this was what you did in the fall semester, there's nothing wrong with it. Don't worry about it. As we said, there's hundreds of ways to complete your HASS requirements, and some students who did the HASS inquiry in the fall might be looking at Gen Psych for the spring, so you just reversed it. But what you should definitely be doing is taking your HASS inquiry course this spring semester, because you will not be able to register for HASS inquiry courses as a sophomore. The only one they'll let you in is economics, so IHSS 1200. So you're going to want to look at those IHSS classes. You're going to want to look at STSS 1110 or the GSASS 1600. GSASS are a little bit more challenging to get into. Just keep that in mind. Additionally, what I would suggest is, to take a little stress off your shoulders, is to very much target a HASS inquiry course that is also communication intensive. So that way, this class and this class are one and the same, and that sits right there. And as we see, loads of room to complete your pathway. One extra class remaining again, so if you did love the psych, you know you can take psych, and get a psych minor. So hopefully you found this video helpful. I'm just going to wrap it up by quickly going to the Haas classes that are available in spring, just so you can see what those look like. Okay, so these are the HASS inquiry courses for spring 2020. So we can scroll down and see what that list looks like. I always want you to keep an eye on this over here. So we see HASS inquiry, and we see that language of communication intensive. So what you might be doing is targeting science and scientific misconduct, because you know it would be really convenient to get rid of that communication intensive course. There's also IT and society, which is communication intensive this spring. Century of Environmental Thought, which is communication intensive this spring. So have a look through and see which of these courses is exciting to you. And that is the end of this video.